What started as jokes among friends and coworkers ended in tragedy when things went too far. These real cases reveal how ordinary pranks can spiral into deadly disasters in seconds. It was September 14, 2017, at a community center in Fresno, California. The evening shift had just begun, leaving the building mostly empty except for a few staff members finishing their daily tasks. Linda Patterson was 47 and worked part-time as a receptionist at the Riverside Community Center. Divorced and living alone, she kept a quiet routine centered around work. She managed high blood pressure and mild asthma, which made exertion difficult and heightened her anxiety during emergencies. Visitors generally knew her as kind and reliable, though some younger gym members dismissed her or made quiet remarks about her appearance. The center was an aging building with frequent repairs, and Linda was familiar with its safety restrictions. Naturally cautious and rule-oriented, she tended to trust urgent warnings from people she believed knew the building well. That Thursday evening, Linda was working the front desk alone when 22-year-old Derek Stone approached her. A regular gym patron, Derek had mocked her to friends for weeks and had overheard her mention a fear of fires. Hoping to film a panicked reaction for social media, he chose the evening shift because Linda was usually alone and had already noticed ongoing construction he could exploit for the prank. The stairwell had been closed for weeks due to ongoing repairs. Bright orange barricades, caution tape, and multiple warning signs blocked the entrance, indicating that the area was restricted and unsafe due to construction. Derek, determined to make his prank more dramatic, moved the barricade aside and cut through the caution tape earlier that day, creating a narrow opening just large enough for someone to pass through. He knew the area was off-limits and that the drop was dangerous, but assumed Linda would stop before anything serious happened. Derek told Linda there was a strong smell of gas coming from the main building and that she needed to evacuate immediately through the back emergency exit. He claimed the front doors had been sealed by the fire department and that everyone else had already left through the rear of the building. Derek spoke with urgency and authority, making Linda believe there was a real emergency. He even held his shirt over his nose to make the gas leak seem more convincing. Linda trusted Derek's warning and quickly gathered her purse and keys. Derek led her toward the back of the building, directing her to the barricaded stairwell. The warning signs and tape were still visible, but in her panic, Linda followed Derek through the opening he had created. Derek watched as Linda hurried into the dimly lit stairwell, then stepped back to film her reaction. Linda rushed down the stairs, believing she was escaping a gas leak. Her breathing was already labored from her asthma and the stress of the situation. As she reached the landing, she stepped onto a section of unfinished flooring that had been temporarily covered with plywood. The board shifted under her weight and gave way, sending her falling 12 feet onto the concrete below. The impact was severe, and Linda's screams echoed through the empty building. A maintenance worker in the parking lot heard the crash and rushed inside to find Linda unconscious at the bottom of the construction area. Derek had fled immediately after realizing what happened. Linda died from internal injuries and rapid blood loss caused by the fall before emergency services could arrive. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen, with rapid hemorrhage as the primary fatal event. Police reviewed security footage and quickly identified Derek as the person who had tampered with the barricades and led Linda into the restricted area. He was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter, reckless endangerment, and criminal trespass. Derek pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. The case was officially closed after the sentencing, with the community center implementing stricter safety protocols and staff training to prevent similar incidents in the future. In Fresno, a fake emergency became a real tragedy. But across the country in Nevada, workplace pranks would prove just as deadly when construction equipment became a weapon. It was July 4th, 2016, at an abandoned construction site outside Las Vegas, Nevada. Extreme heat baked the empty site, where only a small cleanup crew was working the holiday shift. Miguel Santos was 34 years old and worked short-term construction jobs wherever labor was available. He shared an apartment with several other workers and sent most of his earnings back to his family. Miguel kept largely to himself and spoke limited English, relying on co-workers to explain tasks and instructions on site. He was known for showing up early, volunteering for extra work, and agreeing quickly when asked for help, even when he did not fully understand the situation. On this job, Miguel was working alongside 3 younger co-workers who were irritated about being scheduled on the holiday. They had spent the morning moving slowly, complaining about the heat and the lack of supervision at the abandoned site. Over time, they had grown frustrated with Miguel's eagerness to work, often teasing him for being overly serious and not catching on to jokes. That afternoon, the irritation escalated into an idea they framed as a harmless prank. Near the center of the site stood a large, partially completed concrete water tank. The structure was cylindrical, with thick walls, a narrow access opening at the top, and no active ventilation system. The interior had recently been coated with waterproofing sealants, and warning signs posted nearby indicated that the tank was a confined space, requiring air testing and safety equipment before entry. The tank had been sealed off for future work, but the access hatch remained unsecured. The 3 co-workers told Miguel they wanted to test how sound carried inside the tank, joking that it would echo loudly. They said it was part of a quick safety check and promised him extra cash if he helped for a minute. They assured him they would stay right outside and open the hatch immediately. Miguel hesitated briefly, but agreed, trusting their explanation and assuming it was routine. Miguel climbed into the tank using a temporary ladder. Once he was inside, one of the men pulled the heavy hatch closed, latching it shut as part of the prank. They expected Miguel to shout or bang on the wall so they could laugh and open it again. Instead, the interior air quickly became difficult to breathe. The tank was small, sealed, and still contained concentrated chemical vapors from the sealant application. With no airflow, oxygen levels dropped while fumes accumulated. Within a short time, Miguel's voice weakened. He called out that he felt dizzy and could not breathe properly. At first, the others assumed he was exaggerating, continuing the joke for a few more moments. When Miguel stopped responding altogether, panic set in. They tried to reopen the hatch but struggled with the latch mechanism, which had not been used in weeks and had partially warped in the heat. As they fumbled with the hatch, one of the men ran to find help. A security guard from a nearby commercial building noticed the commotion and called emergency services. By the time the hatch was forced open, Miguel was unconscious inside the tank. First responders arrived minutes later, but were unable to revive him. Miguel was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation due to oxygen displacement in a confined space, with chemical vapor inhalation as a contributing factor. Investigators confirmed that the tank met the criteria for a hazardous confined space and that proper safety procedures had not been followed. Police arrested all 3 co-workers. During questioning, they admitted the act was meant as a prank and that they did not believe the tank posed a serious danger. All 3 were charged with involuntary manslaughter and reckless endangerment. Each later accepted plea agreements and received prison sentences. The construction company responsible for the site was fined for failing to properly secure hazardous areas, and the case was officially closed following sentencing. Las Vegas showed how a reckless prank and a moment's disregard for safety could turn a construction site into a death trap. It was December 3, 2018, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Indianapolis, Indiana. The winter afternoon was cold and gray, with temperatures hovering around 28 degrees Fahrenheit as daylight faded. Most residents were indoors and the streets were calm as mail delivery continued on schedule. Jonathan Miller was 36 years old and had been working as a postal carrier for just 3 months. After losing his previous office job earlier that year, he had taken the position out of necessity and was still adjusting to the physical demands of the route. Jonathan lived alone and was recovering emotionally from a recent divorce, trying to rebuild his routine and sense of stability. He approached his work carefully and methodically, determined to avoid mistakes and prove himself dependable. Residents along his route generally recognized Jonathan as polite and reserved. He followed the same path each day, keeping to a predictable schedule that helped him manage the workload. Though some younger residents found his seriousness dull, many homeowners appreciated his consistency, especially during winter when missed deliveries were common. One of those younger residents was Austin, a 17-year-old high school senior who lived nearby and was home during winter break. Bored and restless, Austin had spent several afternoons watching Jonathan's route from his front window. He found the postal worker's routine amusing and decided it would be entertaining to scare him for a reaction he could record. Austin had previously experimented with small consumer firecrackers during holidays and believed they were harmless if used briefly and from a distance. Austin chose a mailbox belonging to a neighbor who was away visiting family. He taped several small firecrackers inside the metal box, attaching a simple fuse to the door so they would ignite when it was opened. His intention was to create a loud bang and a burst of smoke, nothing more. Austin positioned himself across the street with his phone, expecting Jonathan to jump back or shout before continuing his route. At approximately 2:30 p.m., Jonathan reached the mailbox. As he opened the door, the firecrackers ignited simultaneously. The confined metal box amplified the noise, producing a sharp blast and a flash that startled Jonathan instantly. The sound echoed down the quiet street, drawing attention from nearby homes. Startled and disoriented, Jonathan recoiled backward. His foot slipped on a thin patch of ice that had formed on the edge of the sidewalk near the curb. Unable to regain his balance, he fell hard, striking the back of his head against the concrete and landing awkwardly on his side. His mail satchel twisted beneath him as he collapsed. Several residents rushed outside after hearing the explosion. They found Jonathan lying motionless on the sidewalk, bleeding from a head wound. Austin stood frozen across the street, realizing the prank had gone wrong. He did not approach and fled moments later, leaving the phone behind near the curb. Emergency services were called immediately by nearby residents. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Jonathan unconscious with a severe head injury. He was stabilized at the scene and transported to the hospital, but his condition deteriorated rapidly during transit. Despite continued resuscitation efforts, Jonathan was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The coroner later determined that Jonathan died from blunt force head trauma sustained during the fall. The report concluded that the mailbox explosion itself was non-lethal, but the sudden blast caused a startle response that led directly to the loss of balance and fatal impact. Investigators classified the death as accidental, with the prank identified as the initiating factor. Police recovered a mobile phone left near the scene containing footage of the mailbox detonation. Additional firecrackers were found during a search of Austin's home. Austin admitted to setting up the prank, stating he believed it would only cause a loud noise. He was charged with reckless homicide and reckless endangerment in juvenile court, later pleading guilty. The case was closed after sentencing, and local authorities issued renewed safety warnings regarding prank-related hazards. We got 2 more horrific prank deaths ahead. Make sure you subscribe to see how far these deadly jokes can go. It was October 31st, 2017, in a college dormitory kitchen in Portland, Oregon. Halloween night had brought temperatures down to 45 degrees, and students throughout the building were preparing for costume parties and celebrations. Liam Gupta was 28 years old and working as a graduate student in chemistry while serving as a teaching assistant to pay for his studies. He was brilliant academically, but struggled with social situations and had never learned to read social cues properly. Liam lived alone in graduate housing and spent most of his time either in the laboratory or studying in his small apartment. He had never been invited to parties or social events during his years in college. He worked in the campus chemistry lab, which gave him access to various laboratory equipment and chemicals, including liquid nitrogen used for research experiments. Liam was known among the undergraduate students for being extremely knowledgeable about chemistry, but also for being awkward and eager to fit in with the younger crowd. The isolation had been particularly difficult for Liam during his graduate studies, as he watched other students form friendships while he remained focused solely on his research. That Halloween evening, 18-year-old Stephen Patel approached Liam about participating in a party video. Stephen was a popular undergraduate freshman who ran a social media account focused on viral challenges and stunts. He had been looking for new content that would attract views and had heard about Liam's access to laboratory materials. Stephen told Liam about a trending social media challenge where people created instant ice cream using liquid nitrogen. Stephen's account was competing with other freshmen for campus popularity, and he needed something dramatic to stand out. He had noticed Liam's eagerness to be included in social activities and saw an opportunity to exploit that desperation. Stephen had researched liquid nitrogen experiments online and thought he understood the safety requirements, though his knowledge was superficial and incomplete. Stephen convinced Liam to bring a small dewar flask of liquid nitrogen from the lab for a demonstration, assuring him it would be safe and that they would only use it for the ice cream video. The plan was to show how liquid nitrogen could instantly freeze cream and flavorings to create ice cream in seconds. Stephen set up his camera equipment in the dormitory kitchen while Liam prepared the liquid nitrogen in a metal container. As the video progressed, Stephen encouraged Liam to make the demonstration more dramatic and visually impressive. He suggested that Liam try the dragon breath effect, where a person briefly holds a small amount of liquid nitrogen in their mouth and exhales vapor, a stunt that had circulated online despite repeated safety warnings about its dangers. Liam was hesitant because he understood the extreme dangers of liquid nitrogen, an extremely cold cryogenic substance, but Stephen and several party guests pressured him, insisting it would be safe if done quickly. Liam reluctantly agreed and attempted to demonstrate the stunt using a small amount of liquid nitrogen. During the process, some of the liquid was accidentally swallowed. Inside his stomach, the liquid nitrogen rapidly expanded into gas, causing severe internal pressure and tearing. Liam doubled over in pain, dropped the container, and collapsed to the kitchen floor as he went into medical shock. Several party guests witnessed his collapse and called 911. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes and transported Liam to the hospital. Despite emergency intervention, his condition deteriorated rapidly due to internal injuries. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The coroner determined that Liam died from internal injuries caused by rapid gas expansion following the ingestion of liquid nitrogen, leading to catastrophic internal trauma and shock. Stephen initially claimed that Liam had volunteered to try the stunt on his own, but video evidence and witness statements showed Stephen encouraging and pressuring Liam throughout the incident. The university conducted an internal investigation and found that Stephen had violated campus safety policies by encouraging the misuse of hazardous materials. Stephen was expelled from the university and charged with criminal negligence. The case was closed after Stephen accepted a plea deal for reckless endangerment and received probation and community service. The chemistry department implemented stricter controls on laboratory chemical access and mandatory safety training for all students. Liam's tragedy showed how a moment of peer pressure and misplaced trust in a controlled environment could turn deadly. But in a quiet Arizona neighborhood, a prank meant to scare a neighbor would spiral into a fatal confrontation, proving that even at home, a reckless joke can have irreversible consequences. It was June 15, 2016, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. The evening temperature was still 89 degrees even after sunset, and most residents had their windows closed and air conditioning running to escape the desert heat. Victor Martin was 39 years old and had been unemployed for 6 months after his accounting firm downsized and eliminated his position. He lived alone in his deceased mother's house, struggling to pay the mortgage with his rapidly dwindling savings account. Victor was known as a friendly neighbor who regularly chatted with others on his street and had maintained several close friendships from his previous job. He spent his time applying for jobs online and meeting friends for coffee to network. Recent break-ins in the neighborhood had made Victor extremely concerned about home security. He had installed a new alarm system, motion sensor lights, and deadbolt locks on all doors. The neighborhood had experienced a series of break-ins over the past few months, which had left many residents on edge. Victor had become increasingly focused on home security, researching different alarm systems and defensive measures. His friends had noticed his growing preoccupation and suggested he try to relax, but Victor was determined to protect his home. His neighbor's son, 24-year-old Jackson, had been watching Victor's security routines for several weeks. Jackson lived next door with his parents and often saw Victor checking his locks and peering through windows at night. Jackson had been drinking more frequently since losing his restaurant job 2 weeks earlier and wanted to take out his frustrations on someone he saw as an easy target. Jackson recruited 2 of his friends, both 22 years old, to help him stage what they believed would be a harmless but realistic home invasion prank meant only to scare Victor. Their plan was to shut off the power to Victor's house by flipping the exterior breaker switch, make noise outside his windows, photos, and then reveal it was all a joke after scaring him sufficiently. They thought Victor's panicked reaction would be entertaining and worth filming for social media. On the evening of June 15th, Jackson and his friends put their plan into action. They located the exterior breaker panel and switched off the main power at approximately 10:30 p.m., plunging the interior into complete darkness. The three young men then began making deliberate noise outside Victor's windows while wearing dark clothing and masks to look like real intruders. Victor immediately noticed the power outage and became suspicious when he heard footsteps and voices outside his house. He tried to call 911 on his cell phone, but the device was dead because he had forgotten to charge it earlier that day. The combination of darkness, strange noises, and inability to call for help sent Victor into a state of panic. Believing he was facing a real home invasion, Victor grabbed a baseball bat from his bedroom closet and went to investigate the source of the noise in his backyard. In the darkness of his backyard, Victor confronted Jackson near the back door. Unable to see clearly and believing he was defending his home from a real intruder, Victor swung the baseball bat with full force. Jackson fell backward and struck his head on the concrete patio stones with a sickening crack. Victor's elderly neighbor had been watching the commotion from her bedroom window and witnessed the entire confrontation. She immediately called 911 when she saw Jackson collapse and stop moving. Victor realized what had happened when he turned on his phone's flashlight and saw Jackson's face beneath the mask. Jackson died from severe head trauma caused by the impact with the concrete. Victor was taken into custody for questioning, but was released after police reviewed the evidence and determined he had acted in lawful self-defense during what he reasonably believed was an active home invasion. The county attorney declined to file charges, and investigators concluded that the staged home invasion prank directly created the conditions that led to Jackson's death, despite Victor acting in lawful self-defense. The two friends who had helped plan the staged invasion were charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct in connection with the prank. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.